April 23rd is the feast of St. George, a saint best known for being a dragon slayer, but there is far more to his life than this. George was born to a noble family in Palestine during the 3rd century. He was raised as a Christian, but when he was a young boy, both his parents died, leaving him an orphan. George traveled to Nicomedia and presented himself to the Emperor Diocletian, applying to be a soldier in the Roman armies. George was welcomed as his father had been one of the greatest of the Roman warriors. George rose swiftly and was soon promoted to Roman tribune, a very high rank indeed. Alas, in 302 AD, Diocletian began his infamous persecution and issued the edict that everyone must worship the pagan gods on penalty of death. Bravely, George refused, doing so publicly in front of his fellow soldiers. Diocletian was embarrassed and tried to persuade George to change his mind, offering him bribes of land and money and slaves. George refused to change his Christian beliefs, and Diocletian was left with no choice but to have him killed. George gave away his possessions to the poor and was then captured and put to horrible tortures. He was placed on a wheel of swords and cut, and then was finally beheaded on April 23, 303 AD. The empress and a pagan priest were so moved by his martyrdom that they themselves converted, and they too were executed. George's remains were returned to Palestine for burial, and he was soon venerated as a martyr and example of Christian bravery. The story of George and the dragon is not part of the earliest stories, and it is most likely an allegorical telling of his resistance to the pagan emperor. In the story, George traveled to a city which suffered from the attacks of a mighty and evil dragon. To placate the dragon, the people had first offered sheep, and then, when they ran out of sheep, they had begun to offer their daughters, chosen by lottery. When George arrived, he found the princess of the city had been chosen to be offered to the dragon. George rode to the dragon's cave and, protecting himself with the sign of the cross, fought and slew the dragon, rescuing the princess. Because of his bravery, the pagan villagers renounced their false religion and embraced Christianity. The dragon story is told with different variations all over the world. As Catholics, we can believe it to be literal or not, but the certain truth is that St. George is a brave martyr for the faith, and we should all seek to emulate him and his fearless faith.